Hello, I'm sitting here today with Matthias Palmer. Welcome, Matthias.
Thank you.
You are the CTO and co-founder of MetaSolutions, where you focus on providing products and services around linked open data. Your expertise lies in metadata and interoperability, more specifically how to adapt existing vocabularies to domain-specific needs by using application profiles, and specifically DCAT-AP is one of your expertises, and you're responsible for the Swedish version and adoption of DCAT-AP, and you've been involved, if I got that right, since the early beginnings of the specification. You try to also provide that service not only in Sweden, but in other European organizations.
Yeah, we help out when we can.
Yeah. My first question would be to you, to be a bit high level, is why should people use linked open data compared to like a traditional data service?
I would say that perhaps there are two things here. It's kind of the grammar of linked data and also the lexicon of linked data. So, as we all know, the linked data is based on the language RDF, and that provides a grammar which makes it easy to express data structures without having to invent a lot of things. We're talking about things and we are expressing statements around things. So that is not the same thing as having an XML structure or a JSON structure, because RDF can be expressed in all of these different syntaxes. So we have some help from the language, or the abstract language of RDF. Also the lexicon of linked data, because even though we have the basic of the grammar, we still need a lot of words to express things, nouns and verbs. And with that lexicon even growing, it's something that we publish on the web, and we don't have to start from the beginning. We can reuse what our other people have already defined in terms of verbs, that's the properties, and the classes and properties together forms this lexicon.
Okay. Having that more structural language, what benefit does that give compared to the data services that don't have that? Is it a mapping issue? Is it a translation issue?
Well, to start with, you don't have to start from the beginning. And sometimes you do. I mean, if you are in a totally new domain, you probably need to define your own lexicon. But you can reuse existing verbs. Well-known vocabularies like Dublin Core, friend of a friend, DCAT, and so on, all provide good verbs to use to relate things to each other. So if you compare that to an XML-based standard, there are mechanisms of including another standard into a second standard, but it's much more awkward since the combination is more syntactical rather than it's built into the structure of the grammar of RDF as a language, which means that you can take two amounts of statements and bring them together, and then you get an enriched, a richer expression of the data at hand, even though that the data comes from two different specifications of two different domains.
Going from just reusing those verbs to something a bit more concrete is why do you need application profiles to get things to work properly?
So there is always the idea of defining your own terms. So I think application profiles help you to keep the lexicon small, to not reinvent new things. So when you talk about that you are feeding the cat, you don't say animal feeding the cat, you just say feed the cat. You don't need to have a new verb just because you have a new range of your verb in this case. So yeah, it keeps it small, and it also helps you to know exactly how to use these verbs in a specific setting, and the classes and the properties. So in a specific setting, we want to know, okay, in the Swedish application, DCAT-AP application profile, where are the ranges of this property? We need to define that more explicitly to help others to use the language that we agreed on in Sweden. It's very similar to in other languages, in other countries, but it's a way of defining the data structures without reinventing things.
With the application profiles and the implementation of them in your own country, home country of Sweden, what were some of the challenges that you faced there while you were implementing it and trying to start to use it? And what challenges do you think that you're still dealing with even now? So not connected to the initial growing pains.
Well, the first thing was that there were vagueness and there were things that were missing. When DCAT-AP came out, it was a refinement of DCAT from the V3C. And it did help with a lot of the values that you were supposed to have in certain places. So that was good. But there were places that were just left out, and there were things that were unclear. What are the ranges of the licenses, for instance? Do you have to have a set of licenses? We decided, yeah, let's always use Creative Commons as a basis. These are the URLs you should use. And a lot of that kind of more specific guidance. And for me, my background is also as a developer, building an authoring environment where you can actually fill in this information made it very clear that there is a lot of missing things in the specification. And some of these missing things are explicitly left out because it's not the same in all member countries in Europe, so they cannot be specified. So these two things needed to be straightened out. But then there were also a harvesting mechanism that were needed to be specified. I mean, it's not so hard to just say, okay, here we have an RDF XML file with a lot of triples, a lot of statements about datasets, information about datasets and data catalog. But when you bring that into a data portal, how do you merge that into the system? How do you update the system so you don't get duplicates or detect that changes has been made or remove things that has been actually deleted from the original catalogs? That was another issue. And that was the more practical things that in Sweden, the ownership of the specification of the application profile of Sweden for DCAT has been turned over between different organizations. And that meant my counterpart, the responsible one, has been changing. So it has been a bit hard to get a real deep conversation going on what are the actual needs in the Swedish setting. That has been stabilized now since several years, so I'm very happy about that. But that was an issue. So, but then you're saying what is still open? There are areas which I think are still unclear in the specifications. For instance, a contact point is supposed to be expressed as a vCard, but it's not stated how many of the properties from a vCard should be used. There's a rights section on both the catalog level and on the distribution level that is largely undefined if it's supposed to be a deeper structure or if you're just referencing a document. Yeah, there are a few of those, and in many cases these are the not so well used parts of the specification, and maybe that is why they haven't been ironed out in detail yet.
So I've heard some words about like data quality, make sure that that's good, the governance, the ownership around it. Out of all of those things that you've experienced when implementing DCAT-AP, with the creation of the data spaces now, there are a lot of organizations that are starting to use DCAT-AP, but don't necessarily have all of the implementation and experience that you already had. So my question is, what would you give them as an advice if you needed to talk to them and say, like, you sit down with them and you say, you need to tread carefully here, or if you do this, things will go a lot smoother than if you wouldn't do them?
Yeah, okay, so data spaces, the needs of specific domains. It's simple, or it's easy to see that you may want to provide a lot of extra properties because your domain is so specific and you have all of these needs. But on the other hand, you have to consider what is really the use case of having this information about datasets. It's about, to a large extent, discoverability and reuse. And maybe you don't have to provide everything in the metadata. Maybe some things can be provided in documentation that you associate to the dataset, maybe like a website or maybe for more formal specification that you associate to the dataset. It's not necessary to have everything as explicit properties inside of the metadata record of each dataset. That being said, sure, it's fine to have specific profiles for health or mobility statistics. We already have that in geodata. Sure, the model allows it. I mean, the way of doing application profiles is very open for extending it, and as long as we have this common level of the properties that everyone should at least understand, it shouldn't be a hindrance for the harvesting or how we present the information in data portals.
So do I hear a combination of keep it lean and also reuse as much what's already there as possible?
Yes, for sure. Look at the, I mean, if you look at the specification, you have mandatory, recommended, and optional. From my perspective, optional properties are things that are provided, like if you have a need, maybe you should use these before you start inventing something for yourself. So look into the optional section. I would be my first recommendation there. And
With the data spaces, do you expect DCAT-AP to change a bit more, because there are a lot of extensions now that are being created for all of these domains? Do you think it will become more difficult to manage the specification the more adoption it will receive?
I mean, for sure. I mean, we are already seeing how the DCAT-AP core or domain-independent part has been growing, and partly it feels like it's the geodata domain that has infused a lot of extensions, like with the data series and data set series, and that made it more complex. And of course, it might be that other domains will do the same, and it becomes bigger and bigger. I think we should just try to keep that, well, stop that as much as possible. If there is an independent need, of at least two different domains have the same need, then we should accept it and include it. Just to track back a little bit, you said what the data spaces could be learning from the DCAT-AP, and I think the basic take-home message is the way we use application profiles when we do data specifications. And DCAT-AP can be used for the information about datasets, but for each domain you need to specify the data within that domain as well. That's another level. And how do you do that? How do you build the specifications there? And I think in that case, the idea of application profiles, which is not new, it's been around for a long time, since the late 90s, but it's been very explicitly used inside of DCAT-AP. And I think that some of that lessons learned can be brought along into how you can do data spaces in many of the member states. Like the core vocabularies can be extended in the form of application profiles, like the core business vocabulary can be used in the Nordic setting by using an application profile of the core vocabulary. Going
beyond then the sharing of metadata, within the community you're also quite known for being a big fan of not only exchanging data and metadata, but also the underlying semantic specification that structures the data of a data set. What do you think needs to happen, or maybe it's already fine as is, but what should happen to facilitate the exchange of those data models or semantic data specifications, or however you want to call them, to make that exchange between different organizations make that go smoother?
So I think that the main use case here is that you have data sets, and those data sets needs to be expressed that they have a reference, they are conforming to a specification. What are you referring to? Are you referring to an information model? Or are you referring to maybe a document, a PDF? I think we need to lift that a bit and talk about the specification as an entity that has several specification parts. And the specification part can be something like an information model in UML or in RDFS or as an application profile, or maybe referenced vocabularies or terminologies expressed in SCOS and so on. And this taken together forms a specification. So that's the first thing. I think we should identify the specification and its specification part using some kind of metadata vocabulary. And I've been arguing for using the profiles vocabulary for quite some time, prof. I think it's a nice fit. And in addition to that, you also need to have the URIs, of course, of the specifications. It's not enough to have just the metadata expression. If we express the same specification twice with 2 different URIs, we're going to have trouble. So some kind of rule for when do you define the specifications? Who should do it? Maybe the one that's responsible for the specification, which means that we will have specifications on the national level, on the regional level, on the European level, and then we have some that are international. And we should relate the specifications to each other via like is profile of or next version of and so on. And that means referring to maybe from a national specification to a European specification. Which brings us to the question of how do we get all of this to connect to each other? And then we need some kind of harvesting mechanism to bring it up to maybe like a semantic registry or a specification registry or what we want to call it. And such a mechanism could be quite close to how we collect data sets into data portals today.
Yeah.
But we need to not harvest in 2 directions, but when we harvest them to the top level, they already need to have, to the European level, the national adaptations in for instance, the example I took earlier with the core business vocabulary. If you have a Nordic variant, it would extend the core vocabulary, the core business vocabulary. And then you would need already to know the URI of that one. So you need to refer to something that is defined on the European level. So you need to connect this somehow. I'm not sure exactly how to do this, if it's like harvesting in both directions or having an API where you can easily get the URIs of these specifications. I'm not sure yet, but I'm sure we can figure it out.
But so you want to go one step further than just making them findable, because you could have a registry where you just have a list, but what you're describing is going beyond this, just cataloging basically.
Yeah, you need cataloging, but you need a service to look them up. Unless you make sure you duplicate the specifications in all relevant places. Like if you have an authoring environment for describing specifications, you need to be able to refer to the European specification you are extending. And how do you do that? And one more thing I nearly forgot. The specification parts, one of them is really the application profiles, and we haven't really figured out a way of doing a formal expression of application profiles yet. That's something we really need to focus on rather soon, and I think we can do that using a variant of Shackle.
Is that something that SEMIC could help with the development of or the support?
Yeah. Yes, I mean, I think there are already strong contenders who want to work with this, and maybe we could just have SEMIC trying to form a group to, maybe a work group or something to do this together, basing it on established standards already, and not do something entirely new, but
reuse.
Reuse, yes. Probably the Shackle, as seen as a vocabulary, we can do an Shackle AP, or it's a really weird thing to have an AP for an AP, but it's like AP squared, perhaps. Yeah. Shackle AP squared.
Well, SEMIC used to be called ISA squared, so it wouldn't be that much off. So.
Good catch.
Okay. Thank you very much for this very insightful conversation, Matthias.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.